I watched her stand there in that red dress 3 sizes too big, trembling fingers clutching fabric that pooled at her feet like blood. 7 years old. Eyes too knowing for a child. And across the marble floor of my mansion, past the armed guards and champagne glasses frozen mid-air, she looked directly at me and said the words that would shatter everything I'd built. "I think you're my father." The room didn't just go silent. It went dead. 20 years in this business and I'd never felt my heart stop until that moment. But it wasn't her words that destroyed me. It was when I looked up and saw her mother standing in the doorway, pale as a ghost, eyes wide with the kind of terror I'd only seen on men before I pulled the trigger. Alara. 7 years. 7 years since she vanished without a trace, without a word, without giving me the chance to explain why there was blood on my hands that night. And now she was here in my world again with a child who had my eyes staring back at me. I turned white. Not pale. White. Like every drop of blood in my body decided to abandon ship. Comment below if you've ever had your past show up at your door uninvited, because what happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty. But that moment didn't happen by accident. 3 weeks earlier my city was drowning in whispers. Power shifts in the underworld don't happen quietly. They happen with bodies in alleys and politicians suddenly resigning. I'd spent 2 decades building an empire that operated in shadows so deep even ghosts got lost. Vincenzo Moretti was a name people spoke in hushed tones, never above a whisper, always with a glance over their shoulder. To most people I was a myth. But to Alara I was something worse. I was a memory she'd spent 7 years trying to erase. We met during the coldest winter the city had seen in decades. I'd taken 3 bullets during a territorial dispute, bleeding out in an alley behind a hospital. My men dragged me to the service entrance and begged the first doctor they saw to save my life. That doctor was Alara. She had honey-colored hair that caught the fluorescent lights like liquid gold, hands that moved with surgical precision even while they shook, and eyes that held no judgment when she saw the gun tucked into my belt. She didn't ask questions. She didn't call security. She just stitched me back together in a storage room that smelled like disinfectant and secrets. "You're lucky," she whispered, threading the last suture. "Another inch to the left and you'd be dead." I looked at her, then really looked at her, and something shifted. Not attraction exactly. Recognition. Like 2 people walking through darkness suddenly realizing they weren't alone. That should have been the end of it. 1 night, 1 life saved, 1 debt repaid through silence. But I came back the next week. Not because I needed medical attention, but because I couldn't stop thinking about the woman who'd saved me without asking for anything in return. In my world, everyone wanted something. Money, protection, power, revenge. But Alara had looked at me like I was just a man bleeding on her table, not a monster wearing expensive suits. We started meeting in that same storage room. Late nights when her shifts ended and my business was done. She'd bring coffee that tasted like burnt hope, and I'd bring stories that made her laugh despite herself. I fell in love with her somewhere between her explaining human anatomy and me teaching her how to spot a liar. I found someone who saw me as human. But secrets have weight, and mine were crushing me. The night I decided to tell her everything, my second-in-command Adrian Rosa had other plans. A rival family had kidnapped one of our couriers. The situation demanded immediate response. I told Alara to wait for me at her apartment, that I'd explain everything when I returned. I didn't tell her I was walking into an execution. By the time I arrived at the warehouse, things had already gone nuclear. Gunfire. Screaming. Blood spreading across concrete like spilled wine. I did what I had to do to protect my people. What I didn't know was that Alara had followed me. Worried when I didn't call, scared something had happened, she tracked my location through a phone I'd stupidly left unlocked. She arrived just as I was standing over Adrian, gun pressed to his temple, demanding to know who'd betrayed us. He saw me pull the trigger. Not in self-defense. Not in the heat of battle. She saw me execute a man who was already beaten, already broken, already begging. She saw the monster I'd spent months hiding, and the look on her face shattered something in my chest that's never healed. I tried to explain. Tried to make her understand that in my world, mercy gets you killed and hesitation gets your family buried. But she didn't want explanations. She wanted out. "Don't follow me," she whispered, backing toward the door with tears streaming down her face. "Don't call me. Don't ever come near me again." And then she ran. I honored her request even though it killed me. For 7 years, I convinced myself she was better off without me, safer in a life where bullets and blood weren't daily occurrences. I built my empire higher, made my name more feared, and tried to forget the woman who'd seen my humanity and chosen to walk away. But I never stopped looking for her in crowds. 3 weeks ago, fate decided it was time to collect its debt. The fire that brought us face to face would spark a war that would burn my entire world to ashes. Because what I didn't know then was that she hadn't just been running from me. She'd been running with something precious. Something that would make every enemy I'd ever made suddenly very interested in destroying everything I loved. And the child standing in my mansion that night, the one calling me father, was about to become the most valuable target in the criminal underworld. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the moment everything started unraveling, because the real twist isn't what you think it is. The call came at 2 in the morning, the kind that wakes you from nightmares into something worse. My lieutenant's voice was tight with urgency. "Boss, there's a situation at St. Catherine's Hospital. One of our men got hit during a warehouse raid. He's bleeding out and the surgeon treating him recognized the crest." My blood went cold. That hospital was across town, far from my territory. Far enough that it should have been safe neutral ground. "What crest?" I demanded, already reaching for my jacket. "Yours." Tattooed on his wrist. The doctor saw it and froze up. Started shaking. "My guys think she might run." I was out the door before he finished speaking. Because I knew exactly which doctor would recognize my family crest and react with fear instead of curiosity. Alara. The drive took 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours. My mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. Had she stayed in the city all this time? Had she been this close for 7 years while I convinced myself she'd fled to another state, another country, another life? Have you ever discovered someone you lost was right under your nose the whole time? Drop a comment, because what I found out next changed everything. I arrived at the emergency entrance just as she was walking out, still wearing blood-stained scrubs, face pale under the parking lot lights. She didn't see me at first. Too focused on getting to her car, on putting distance between herself and the man who carried my mark. Ilara. Her whole body went rigid. For 3 seconds she didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't turn around. Then slowly, like someone facing their executioner, she looked back at me. 7 years had only made her more beautiful. Lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a hardness to her jaw that spoke of struggles I knew nothing about, but still the same woman who'd saved my life in a storage room that smelled like secrets. Vincenzo. My name came out like a prayer and a curse tangled together. "You need to leave." "I didn't know you were still here," I said, taking a step closer. He took a step back. "I thought you'd left the city." "I did." Her voice shook. "I came back 2 years ago. Opened a small clinic on the east side, far from your territory. Far from anything that might bring us into contact. And it worked until tonight. The man my guys brought in has your crest branded into his skin like cattle," she finished, anger flashing in her eyes. "Do you know what that does to me? Seeing that symbol after all these years? Remembering what you are. What I am. Not who I am." The distinction cut deeper than any bullet. "I'm sorry. I'll make sure my men never come here again. You won't have to see me or anything connected to me. You have my word." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just exhaustion and something that looked like grief. "Your word. Like that means anything." Fair point. I turned to leave, to honor the boundary she'd drawn 7 years ago. But then I heard it. A small voice calling from inside the hospital lobby. "Mom?" Are you coming? I froze. Elara's face went from pale to translucent. She moved fast, positioning herself between me and the entrance, blocking my view. But she wasn't fast enough. Through the glass doors I caught a glimpse of a child. Small, maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing a school uniform that had seen better days. Dark hair. Serious expression. And eyes. Those eyes. You need to go, Elara said, voice trembling now. Not with fear. With something else. Something that felt like panic mixed with resignation. Right now, Vincenzo. Please. But I couldn't move. Because the math was doing itself in my head, brutal and unforgiving. 7 years since she left. A child who looked 6 or 7. The way she was standing between us like a human shield. Elara, I said slowly. Is that? No, she cut me off. Desperate. No, she's not yours. Don't even think it. But the way she said it, the tremor in her voice, the tears suddenly brimming in her eyes, told me everything I needed to know. She was lying. And she was terrified I'd figure it out. What's her name? I asked. That's none of your business. What's her name, Elara? She closed her eyes. Defeated. Isla. Her name is Isla. The name hit me like a freight train because it was my mother's name. The grandmother this child would never know because she died 3 years before I met Elara. I'd told Elara that story during one of our late-night meetings, described how my mother had been the only person in my family who'd tried to steer me away from this life. There was no way that name was a coincidence. I need to meet her, I said. Absolutely not. Elara, no. Her voice cracked. You don't get to walk back into our lives because you're curious. You don't get to traumatize her with your world of violence and blood. He's innocent, Vincenzo. She believes her father was a good man who died a hero. I won't let you destroy that illusion. Her father was a good man who died a hero. The words hung in the air like smoke. What did you tell her about me? I told her you were dead, Elara whispered. I told her you died saving someone from a fire. That you were brave and kind and everything you're not. And she believes it because children believe their mothers. So please, if you ever cared about me at all, leave us alone. I should have walked away. Should have honored her request like I'd done for 7 years. Should have let them disappear back into whatever life she'd built without me. But then Isla pushed through the hospital doors, backpack bouncing against her shoulders, and looked directly at me. Our eyes met. And in that instant I knew 3 things with absolute certainty. 1, she was mine. Biology didn't matter. That recognition was primal, undeniable. 2, Elara had been protecting her from me, from my world, from everything I represented. 3, someone else had figured it out. Because across the parking lot, hidden in the shadows of a black sedan, I caught the glint of a camera lens pointed directly at us. We were being watched. Photographed. Documented. And in my business, photographic evidence of a weakness is a death sentence. Get her inside, I said quietly. Now. Elara must have heard something in my voice because she didn't argue. She grabbed Isla's hand and pulled her back through the doors, moving fast. But before they disappeared, Isla looked back at me one more time. Mom, who was that man? I heard her ask. I didn't hear Elara's response. I was already moving toward the sedan, hand reaching for the gun tucked into my jacket. But by the time I crossed the parking lot, the car was gone. Vanished into traffic like a ghost. Someone knew. Someone had connected the dots between me and Elara and the child I'd just discovered existed. And that meant the countdown to catastrophe had already begun. Because in 48 hours, my entire organization would be under attack, Elara's clinic would be burning, and Isla would be standing in my mansion asking if I was her father. But before any of that happened, I needed to find out who was watching us. Because the list of people who wanted to hurt me was long, but the list of people smart enough to use a child as leverage was terrifyingly short. And at the top of that list was a man I thought I'd killed 7 years ago. I spent the next 2 days digging through surveillance footage, bribing traffic cops, and calling in favors from every connected person in the city. The black sedan had vanished without a trace. No plates, no identification, nothing but the ghost of a camera lens and the knowledge that someone was building a case against me. Against us. My instinct was to bury them deeper. Put protection on Alara's clinic without her knowledge. Station men outside her apartment building. Make sure nothing and no one could get close to them. But I'd learned something in 2 decades of ruling the underworld. Obvious protection draws more attention than invisibility. So instead I did something I hadn't done in years. I reached out. The note was simple. Handwritten on expensive cardstock, delivered by a courier who had no idea who'd hired him. Inside the envelope, dinner. No threats. Just answers. Your choice. I included the address of a restaurant I owned, neutral territory where weapons were checked at the door and violence was forbidden by ancient codes even criminals respected. If she came, it meant she was willing to talk. If she didn't, I'd respect her boundary and protect them from the shadows. She came. Would you have shown up to dinner with someone from your past who terrifies you? Comment your answer, because Alara walked into that restaurant knowing it might be the worst decision of her life. She arrived exactly on time, wearing a black dress that managed to be both elegant and armor-like. Her hair was pulled back severe, makeup minimal, posture rigid. Every inch of her body language screamed, I don't want to be here. But she was here. That counted for something. Thank you for coming, I said, standing as she approached the table. I came because ignoring you didn't work, she replied, sitting without waiting for me to pull out her chair. And because you're right. We need to talk. The waiter brought wine neither of us would drink. The kind of expensive bottle that sits on tables during tense negotiations, untouched and ornamental. Around us, the restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of people pretending not to notice who was dining in the corner booth. Someone's watching us, I said, skipping pleasantries. 2 nights ago at the hospital. Black sedan, professional camera equipment. They were documenting our meeting. Her face remained neutral, but her fingers tightened around her water glass. How do you know it was professional? Because amateurs use phones. Professionals use equipment that can capture clear facial recognition from 100 yards in low light. Whoever took those photos wanted evidence, not gossip. Evidence of what? She asked, but her voice betrayed her. She already knew. Evidence that I have a weakness. Evidence that the untouchable Vincenzo Moretti cares about something other than money and power. Evidence that can be used for leverage, blackmail, or worse. The silence between us stretched thin and dangerous. Finally she spoke. Her name is Isla. She's 7 years old. She likes books about dragons and hates wearing dresses. She's terrified of thunderstorms but pretends to be brave because she thinks that's what heroes do. She draws pictures of a father she's never met and hangs them on our refrigerator. Alara's eyes met mine, fierce and protective. And she's the reason I came back to this godforsaken city 2 years ago, because the school district where we were living was cutting programs and she's gifted Vincenzo. Brilliant. She deserves better than what I could give her in hiding. Every word hit like a physical blow. 7 years of her life condensed into a handful of sentences, and I'd missed all of it. Why didn't you tell me? The question came out rougher than intended. Tell you what? That I was pregnant when I watched you execute a man in cold blood? That I was carrying the child of a monster who kills without hesitation? Her voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I ran because I didn't want her growing up in your world. I didn't want her to learn that love means violence and family means loyalty to criminals. Is she mine? I asked directly. No more dancing around it. Alara looked away, jaw tight. For a long moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Then quietly, biologically? Yes. But in every way that matters, you're not her father. You're a stranger. A name I invented a heroic story around so she wouldn't spend her childhood mourning a man who never deserved her. Biologically, yes. The words should have filled me with something. Joy maybe. Pride. Instead I felt hollow. 'Cause she was right. I hadn't earned the title of father. I just donated DNA and disappeared. I want to meet her, I said. Properly. Not across a parking lot, not in passing. I want to know her. No. Ilera. I said no, Vincenzo. Her hands trembled now, emotion breaking through the armor she'd constructed. You don't get to decide you want to be a father after 7 years of absence. You don't get to walk into her life and disrupt everything I've built just because your ego needs validation. This isn't about ego. Someone knows about her. Someone is documenting our connection. That puts her in danger whether I'm involved or not. That landed. I watched the color drain from her face as the implications sank in. What kind of danger? She whispered. The kind where she becomes a bargaining chip. Where rival families decide the best way to hurt me is through a child I care about. Where her safety depends on whether I'm willing to trade territory, money, or my life for hers. Tell me in the comments, would you accept protection from someone you hate if it meant keeping your child safe? Because Ilera's next decision would determine whether any of us survived what was coming. You're saying she's already a target, Ilera said slowly. Even though she doesn't know you. Even though I've kept her away from your world. Just being yours biologically is enough. Yes. She closed her eyes and I watched 7 years of careful planning crumble in real time. I thought if I stayed far enough away, if I never contacted you, if I built a completely separate life, she'd be safe. I thought biology without connection wouldn't be enough to paint a target on her back. In a normal world, you'd be right. But we don't live in a normal world. No, she agreed bitterly. We live in yours. The waiter approached tentatively, sensing the tension but obligated to do his job. Can I get you anything else? Privacy, I said without looking at him. He vanished. Ilera picked up her wine glass, stared at it like it held answers, then set it back down untouched. If I agree to let you meet her, if I allow you into our lives in any capacity, I need your word on something. Anything. Don't make promises you can't keep, she cut in sharply. Don't tell her you'll be there and then disappear when your business calls. Don't teach her that love is conditional on convenience. And don't ever let her see the side of you I saw in that warehouse. If she has to know you, she needs to know a version of you that won't give her nightmares. I can do that. Can you? She challenged. Can you really separate Vincenzo the father from Vincenzo the crime lord? Because I've seen what you're capable of. I know what you do in the shadows. And I won't let that darkness touch her. He was testing me. Pushing to see if I'd get defensive, angry, violent. Checking if the monster was still living just beneath the expensive suit and rehearsed civility. 7 years ago you were right to run, I said carefully. The man you saw in that warehouse was everything you accused him of being. Brutal, merciless, consumed by a world that only understands power and fear. But you know what changed after you left? What? Nothing. I got worse. I built an empire on the foundation of that brutality. I became the nightmare parents tell their children about. I earned every terrifying story people whisper about Vincenzo Moretti. I leaned forward, holding her gaze. But I'm telling you now with complete honesty, I would burn that entire empire to ash before I let it touch her. She's 7 years old. She likes books about dragons. And she draws pictures of a father who doesn't exist. If you give me a chance, I'll become that father. Not the monster. Not the myth. Just a man trying to protect his daughter. Ilera studied me for a long moment, searching for lies in my expression. Whatever she saw there must have been convincing because her shoulders dropped slightly, some of the tension leaving her body. One meeting, she finally said. Supervised. In a public place during daylight hours. You don't tell her who you are yet. You're just a friend of mine, someone I used to know. If she likes you, if you don't terrify her or trigger any red flags, then maybe we discuss next steps. That's fair. And Vincenzo? She reached across the table, grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. If you hurt her, if you let your world anywhere near her, I will disappear so completely you'll never find us. And I'll make sure she grows up knowing her father was a monster who chose violence over family. Understood. Understood. She released my wrist and stood. Dinner concluded without a single bite of food. I'll text you a time and place. Don't send flowers, don't send gifts, don't try to buy her affection. Just show up like a normal human being. I can do that. She walked toward the exit, heels clicking against marble floor. But before she reached the door, she turned back. You asked why I named her Isla. Your mother's name, I said. I remember. I named her that because despite everything I saw you do, despite every reason I had to hate you, I couldn't forget the night you told me about her. How your mother tried to save you from this life. How she died believing you could be better than what the family business demanded. Alara's voice softened. I named our daughter after her because I wanted to believe that goodness was genetic. That somewhere in Isla's DNA, she carried a piece of a woman who chose love over legacy. Then she was gone, leaving me alone with untouched wine and the weight of expectations I wasn't sure I could meet. I sat there for another hour after she left, thinking about the conversation, about the meeting I'd somehow earned, about the child who drew pictures of a hero who didn't exist. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message was simple, a photograph. It showed Alara walking to her car, keys in hand, face turned slightly toward the camera. Whoever sent it wanted me to know they were still watching. Still documenting. Still building whatever case they were constructing. Below the photo, cute family. Would be a shame if something happened to them. I was out of my seat and dialing my security chief before I'd consciously decided to move. I need a full perimeter on 2 addresses. 24-hour surveillance, rotating shifts, best men only. And find out who's been buying information about me in the last month. Someone's fishing and I want to know who's holding the rod. On it, boss. What's the threat level? Extinction, I replied. Someone's coming for everything I care about. And they just made the mistake of warning me first. Because that's the thing about being a monster everyone fears. People forget that monsters are most dangerous when protecting something precious. They forget that calculated brutality becomes unhinged violence when family is threatened. Whoever sent that photo had just declared war. They didn't know it yet, but they'd already lost. 3 days later, I met Isla for the first time in a park filled with children and sunshine and ice cream vendors. Alara introduced me as an old friend, someone from before. Isla looked at me with those serious eyes that mirrored mine and asked if I liked dragons. I do, I told her honestly. Good, she said, satisfied. Mom's friends are usually boring. But you seem okay. And just like that, I fell in love for the second time in my life. Not the complicated adult love I'd felt for Alara. Something purer. More terrifying. The kind of love that makes you understand why people do impossible things for their children. We spent 2 hours in that park. She told me about the dragon book she was reading, showed me how high she could swing, asked if I thought heroes were real or just stories people told. Some heroes are real, I said carefully. But real heroes don't look like the ones in books. They're just people trying to do the right thing even when it's hard. Were you ever a hero? She asked. I glanced at Alara, who watched us from a nearby bench with an expression caught between hope and fear. I'm trying to be, I answered. Isla seemed to accept that. Hey, you can come back next week if you want. But only if you read the dragon book so we can talk about it. Deal. As we left the park, Isla ran ahead to chase a butterfly, giving me a moment alone with Alara. Thank you, I said quietly. For this. For giving me a chance. Don't make me regret it, she replied. But there was something softer in her voice now. Something that acknowledged I'd passed the first test. That night I bought the dragon book Isla mentioned. Read it cover to cover twice, memorizing details so I could discuss it properly. Fell asleep thinking about a 7-year-old who believed in heroes and a second chance I didn't deserve but would fight like hell to earn. I didn't know then that in 72 hours, everything would explode. I didn't know that the person watching us had already set their plan in motion. And I definitely didn't know that the man I thought I'd killed 7 years ago was alive, angry, and coming for everything I loved. But ignorance is temporary. War is forever. The second meeting happened at a library. Isla's choice. She wanted to show me the section where all the dragon books lived, explain her rating system for which authors understood dragon behavior and which ones were just making stuff up. I arrived 15 minutes early, scanned the building for exits and sight lines out of habit, then forced myself to relax. This was a library full of children and parents. The safest place in the city. Or so I thought. Isla burst through the doors with the energy of someone who'd been holding still too long, backpack bouncing, face lit up with excitement. Behind her, Elara moved more carefully, eyes scanning the room in a way that told me she'd spent the last week learning to think like I did. You came. Isla ran up, grabbing my hand without hesitation. Physical touch from a child who barely knew me. It felt like trust one hadn't earned yet. I finished the book, I told her. Twice. Her eyes went wide. Twice. Did you like the part where the dragon saved the village even though everyone was mean to her? That was my favorite part, I said honestly. As it was. The dragon who protected people who tried to kill her, who chose compassion over revenge, who proved that history doesn't have to define future. It felt personal. We spent an hour in the children's section, surrounded by bright colors and tiny chairs that were never designed for someone my size. Isla pulled book after book off shelves, explaining plots and characters and why certain dragons were better written than others. She was brilliant. Sharp in ways that reminded me of my mother, curious in ways that reminded me of Elara. Do you have kids? She asked suddenly, the way children do when they've been quietly studying you. The question hit harder than it should have. No, I said carefully. I don't. Why not? My life was complicated. I didn't think I'd be a good father. She considered this seriously. That's sad. I think you'd be okay at it. You listen when people talk and you don't pretend to understand dragon books if you don't actually get them. Those are important. If you've ever had a child accidentally break your heart with honesty, you know what I felt in that moment. Drop a comment. Elara joined us then, carrying coffee that smelled better than it would taste. Having fun. He's cool, Isla announced. Can he come to dinner? I watched Elara's face cycle through several emotions before landing on cautious acceptance. If he wants to. But we're ordering pizza, not cooking, so don't expect anything fancy. Pizza is perfect, I said. 2 hours later, I sat in their apartment for the first time. It was small. Cramped by my standards. But filled with warmth my mansion had never possessed. Drawings covered the refrigerator, books overflowed from shelves, and everything carried the particular organized chaos of a home where a child actually lived. Isla disappeared into her room to change out of her library clothes, leaving me alone with Elara in a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people. She likes you, Elara said quietly. I wasn't sure she would. She's usually shy around new adults. She's incredible, I replied, meaning it. Smart. Kind. Everything good that exists came from you because it sure as hell didn't come from me. Don't do that. Do what? Diminish yourself. You've been patient with her, engaged with her interests, treated her like a person instead of a miniature adult. That's more than most biological fathers manage. She poured wine for both of us. I'm still terrified of what you represent. But I'm starting to believe you might actually want this for the right reasons. I wanted to respond to reassure her that my intentions were pure, that I'd die before letting my world touch Isla. But before I could speak, my phone vibrated. Security chief. Emergency code. I need to take this, I said apologetically. Elara's expression hardened immediately. Your business. Yes. But I'll make it quick. I stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind me. Talk to me. Boss, we've got a problem. Someone hit 3 of our distribution centers in the last hour. Coordinated strikes. professional execution. They knew exactly where to hit and when our security would be weakest. My blood went cold. Casualties. 5 injured, none dead. But boss, they left a message at each site. Same thing written in spray paint. The past never dies. The past never dies. I knew that phrase. It was what Adrian Rosa used to say before executing someone who'd betrayed the organization. His signature line delivered with a smile before the trigger pull. But Adrian was dead. I'd killed him 7 years ago in that warehouse. Put a bullet in his head myself after he'd given up the names of everyone who'd betrayed us. Watched him bleed out on concrete. Unless I hadn't. Pull every piece of surveillance footage from that night 7 years ago, I ordered. The warehouse execution. I want to see the body, the cleanup, the disposal. Everything. Boss, that's archived in. I don't care if it's archived in hell. Find it. And double the protection on Alara Moss and her daughter. Nobody gets within 100 yards without being vetted. How close do you want them? Close enough to stop bullets. Far enough that Isla doesn't notice. Invisible unless necessary. And find out who's been asking questions about me. Someone's been digging into my past and I want to know who's holding the shovel. I ended the call and stood in the hallway for a moment, mind racing. If Adrian was alive, if he'd somehow survived and spent 7 years planning revenge, then everything I'd built was at risk. And worse, the child on the other side of that door, the one currently showing her mother a drawing she'd made, was in danger she couldn't possibly understand. When I walked back inside, Alara took one look at my face and knew something had changed. You need to leave, she said. Statement, not question. Yes. Your business. Someone's attacking my organization. Coordinated strikes designed to draw me out and make me vulnerable. I need to handle it before it gets worse. Isla emerged from her room wearing pajamas covered in dragons, holding a piece of paper. Look. I drew you. She held up a crayon drawing that showed 3 stick figures holding hands. One tall, one medium, one small. Above them, a dragon spreading protective wings. That's us, she explained. You're the tall one. And the dragon is protecting us because that's what dragons do in good stories. They protect the people they love. I took the drawing with hands that weren't quite steady. This is the best gift anyone's ever given me. You can keep it, she said generously. But you have to come back for dinner again so you can give me a full report on the next book. I promise, I said, kneeling to her level. Nothing will stop me from coming back. I meant it. But I also knew promises made to children are the easiest to break and the hardest to forgive. After Isla went to bed, I stood at the apartment door with Alara. Both of us knowing this moment would define what happened next. Whatever's happening in your world, she said quietly, don't let it touch her. Please. I won't. Vincenzo. She grabbed my arm, fierce. I've started to believe you might actually care about us. Don't make me wrong. I left without answering because words felt insufficient. Actions would have to speak louder. The drive back to my territory took 30 minutes. Long enough for my security chief to compile preliminary findings. Long enough for the first pieces of the puzzle to slot into place. Long enough for me to realize that everything I'd believed for 7 years was a carefully constructed lie. Adrian Rosa hadn't died in that warehouse. The body we'd disposed of had been a plant, a decoy with enough facial trauma to pass casual inspection. The real Adrian had escaped while we'd been busy cleaning up the mess. And he'd spent 7 years building his own empire, recruiting my enemies, planning revenge that would hurt worse than any bullet. And now he knew about Isla. The photo from the restaurant, the surveillance at the hospital, the coordinated attacks on my distribution centers, they were all moves in a game designed to draw me out. To make me vulnerable. To give him access to the one thing that could make me break every rule I'd ever lived by. My phone rang. Unknown number. I knew who it was before answering. Vincenzo. Adrian's voice sounded exactly like I remembered. Smooth, educated, touched with the accent he'd tried so hard to hide when we worked together. Did you miss me? You're supposed to be dead. And you're supposed to be untouchable. Looks like we've both been living lies. The difference is mine was intentional. I pulled over, needed my full attention for this conversation. What do you want? What I've always wanted. Your empire. Your reputation. Everything you built on the foundation of my work. But I've realized something in 7 years of planning, Vincenzo. Taking your throne isn't enough. I want you to suffer first. Get to the point. Cute kid. Red dress at your mansion. She's got your eyes, you know. Anyone with half a brain could see the connection. And I've got more than half a brain. I've got 7 years of patient observation and a network of people who'd love to hurt you through that sweet little family you've been secretly building. Every muscle in my body tensed. Touch her and what? You'll kill me? You already tried that. It didn't take. He laughed, the sound cold and satisfied. Here's what's going to happen. In 48 hours you're going to receive an invitation. A meeting. Neutral ground. You come alone, unarmed, ready to negotiate. Or that little girl and her mother end up as collateral damage in our war. This is between us. Leave them out of it. But they're the best part, Vincenzo. They're the weakness you've spent your entire career avoiding. They're proof that even monsters can love. And love makes you vulnerable. Makes you weak. It makes you exactly what I need you to be. The line went dead. I sat in my car on the side of the road, hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to hurt, mind cycling through scenarios and none of them ended well. If I told Alara the truth, she'd run. Take Isla and disappear so deep I'd never find them. But running wouldn't save them because Adrian had resources now, connections, and 7 years of stored rage fueling his hunt. If I went to the meeting, I'd be walking into a trap. Adrian wanted me vulnerable, and nothing made you more vulnerable than knowing someone you loved was at risk. But if I didn't go, he'd make good on his threats. And I'd spend the rest of my life knowing I'd chosen pride over protection. There was only one move that made sense. Only one way to end this that didn't involve innocent casualties. I had to make Adrian believe I didn't care. Had to convince him that Alara and Isla meant nothing to me, that the photographs and surveillance had captured coincidence, not connection. I had to publicly distance myself from them so completely that Adrian would have no choice but to come at me directly. It would break Isla's heart. Shatter whatever fragile trust I'd built with Alara. Prove them both right about the monster I'd always been. But it would keep them alive. Sometimes love means becoming the villain in someone else's story so they can survive to write the next chapter. Would you sacrifice your reputation to save someone you love? Tell me in the comments because what I did next destroyed everything I'd been building. I drove to my estate and started making calls. By dawn, everyone in the criminal underworld would know that Vincenzo Moretti had been seen with a woman and child, but dismissed them as casual acquaintances. Nothing serious. Nothing worth targeting. It was the biggest lie I'd ever told. And it would have to be convincing enough to save their lives. The next morning I sent Alara a message. Professional. The kind of text that ended things before they'd properly begun. Something came up in my business. I can't make dinner next week. Or any week after. It was nice meeting Isla, but my life isn't compatible with yours. Take care of yourself. I watched the 3 dots appear and disappear 4 times before her response came through. You promised her you'd come back. I lied. People like me do that. The dots appeared again, stayed longer this time, then disappeared without response. I turned off my phone before I could see if she'd try again. Before I could break and explain that pushing them away was the only way to keep them breathing. My security chief knocked on the office door. Boss, we've got intel on the Adrian situation. You're not going to like it. Tell me. He laid out photographs across my desk. Adrian had been busy in 7 years. Built a network that rivaled mine in scope and exceeded it in ruthlessness. He'd recruited my enemies, compromised my allies, and positioned himself as the heir apparent to my throne. And he'd done it all while making everyone believe I'd killed him years ago. The ultimate ghost story. He's been planning this since the warehouse, my chief said. Everything he's built has been designed to take you down. The distribution center hits were just the opening move. What's the main attack? We don't know yet. But boss, there's something else. He hesitated. He's been making inquiries about Alara Moss. Started 3 months ago, long before you reconnected with her. He knew about her before you did. The implications hit like a freight train. Adrian hadn't stumbled onto Alara and Isla by accident. He'd been tracking her for months, waiting for the perfect moment to use her against me. And I'd walked right into his trap by showing up at that hospital. He's going to make a move on her, I said. Soon. Before I can distance myself effectively. You want us to grab her? Bring her here where we can protect her properly? I almost said yes. Almost gave in to the instinct to surround them with walls and guns and every defensive measure I'd spent decades perfecting. But that would prove Adrian right. Would show everyone that Vincenzo Moretti had a weakness worth exploiting. No. Keep surveillance but stay invisible. If Adrian moves on her, I want to know immediately. But we don't interfere unless there's imminent danger. And if there is imminent danger? Then we burn his entire organization to the ground before breakfast. My chief nodded and left. I sat alone in my office, staring at the photograph Isla had drawn. 3 stick figures and a dragon. Protection and love rendered in crayon and hope. I'd pinned it to my wall next to maps of territory and lists of enemies. A reminder of what I was fighting for even as I pushed it away. The 48 hours Adrian mentioned crawled by like years. I attended meetings, made appearances, conducted business with the same cold efficiency I'd always maintained. To anyone watching, I was unchanged. Untouchable. Unaffected by rumors of a woman and child briefly glimpsed in my orbit. But at night, alone, I pulled up surveillance footage of Alara's apartment building and watched grainy video of Isla leaving for school each morning. Backpack bouncing. Smile bright. Unaware that monsters were circling. On the second night Alara called. I almost didn't answer. But some masochistic part of me needed to hear her voice, even if it was filled with justified anger. You're a coward, she said without preamble. I don't know what happened in your business that scared you off and I don't care. But you made a promise to a 7-year-old child and you broke it like it meant nothing. It didn't mean nothing. It meant too much. That's not an explanation, Vincenzo. It's all you're going to get. Silence on the line. Then quieter, she drew you another picture. He wanted to give it to you at dinner. She doesn't understand why you're not coming back. The words cut deeper than any knife. Tell her I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix broken promises. Alara's voice cracked slightly. I was starting to believe you were different. That maybe the monster I saw in that warehouse wasn't all you were. I was wrong. You're exactly what I thought you were. A man who runs when things get complicated. She hung up before I could respond. It was fine. I had nothing to say that would make any of this better. At exactly 48 hours after Adrian's call, my phone rang. Same unknown number. Same cold voice. Tomorrow night, Adrian said. The old foundry on the east side. You know the one. Come alone. No weapons. No backup. Just you and me and a conversation that's 7 years overdue. And if I don't come? Then the woman's clinic burns down during business hours. With her inside. Accidents happen in this city, Vincenzo. Buildings catch fire. People get trapped. Tragic stories everyone will shake their heads about before moving on with their lives. He ended the call before I could respond. I had 24 hours to decide between walking into an obvious trap or risking Alara's life. 24 hours to plan how to survive a meeting designed to end with my death. 24 hours to outmaneuver someone who'd spent 7 years preparing for this exact moment. I spent that day putting my affairs in order. Writing letters to my underbosses detailing succession plans. Transferring assets to untraceable accounts. creating deadman switches that would trigger if I didn't check in by dawn. And I visited Alara's clinic one last time. She was with a patient when I arrived, so I waited in the parking lot like a stalker. When she finally emerged at the end of her shift, exhaustion written into every line of her body, she stopped dead when she saw me leaning against my car. "What do you want?" "No warmth. Just exhaustion and anger." "I need you to leave the city," I said. "Tonight. Take Isla and go somewhere far away. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Use cash only. Disappear completely." "Why would I do that?" "Because someone very dangerous knows about you. About Isla. And tomorrow night I'm going to handle it. But if something goes wrong, if I don't survive the meeting, you need to be gone before anyone realizes I failed." Her expression shifted from anger to fear. "What did you do?" "What I had to do. 7 years ago I thought I killed a man who betrayed my organization. Turns out he survived. And he spent all this time planning revenge that involves hurting me through people I care about." "So you pushed us away to protect us," she said slowly. Understanding dawning. The text message. The canceled dinners. You were trying to make him think we didn't matter to you. "Yes." "Did it work?" "No. He's been watching you longer than I knew you'd come back. He always planned to use you as leverage. The only question is whether he believes you're important enough to be effective bait." Ilara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking small and vulnerable in the fading daylight. "What happens tomorrow night?" "I meet him at the old foundry. Talk through terms of whatever peace he thinks we can negotiate. And then probably fight my way out when the talking turns to shooting." "You're going to die," she whispered. "Maybe. But not before I make sure he can't hurt you or Isla. I've set up contingencies. If I don't make it, my organization will track down everyone connected to Adrian and remove them from the board. He'll die knowing his revenge failed." "That's not comfort, Vincenzo. That's you telling me you've accepted death." "I've always accepted death. Comes with the job. The difference is now I have something worth dying for besides pride and territory." I pulled an envelope from my jacket. "This has instructions. Account numbers. Contacts who'll help you relocate safely. And a letter for Isla explaining why I couldn't keep my promises. Give it to her when she's old enough to understand that sometimes good people do terrible things for the right reasons." Ilara took the envelope with shaking hands. "There has to be another way. If there was, I'd take it. But Adrian isn't interested in negotiation. He wants me destroyed. And he's willing to kill anyone standing near me to make it happen. The only way to keep you safe is to go into his trap and make sure I'm the only casualty." "What about being a father to Isla? What about the promises you made to try? Sometimes being a father means sacrificing yourself so your daughter can have a future. Even if she never knows you did it." I turned back to my car, couldn't look at her face while delivering the final blow. "Leave tonight. Please. Don't make my death meaningless by staying and getting caught in the crossfire." "Vincenzo." Her voice stopped me. "If you survive tomorrow, if you somehow win this impossible fight, come back to us. Promise me you'll come back." I wanted to promise. Wanted to give her hope to hold on to. But I'd already broken one promise to a child I loved. Couldn't break another. "If I survive, you'll know," I said instead. "You'll hear about Adrian's death on the news. And if you still want me in your lives after everything I've put you through, I'll spend the rest of my existence earning back the trust one destroyed." I drove away before she could respond. Before I could see if she was crying or relieved or angry. Before I could change my mind and drag them into protective custody that would only confirm their importance to anyone watching. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my office cleaning guns I wasn't allowed to bring, reviewing maps of the foundry I'd memorized years ago, and thinking about a little girl who drew dragons protecting the people they loved. At midnight, I pulled up surveillance on Alara's apartment building one last time. The lights were off. Either she'd taken my advice and run, or she was asleep, trusting that tomorrow would come without catastrophe. I hoped she was running. At dawn, I dressed in my best suit. No armor. No weapons. Nothing that would give Adrian an excuse to claim I'd violated our terms. Just expensive fabric and the knowledge that today would end with either his death or mine. My security chief tried one last time to talk me out of going alone. Boss, this is suicide. Let us set up overwatch positions. Let us at least shadow you inside. No. If Adrian sees backup, he'll detonate whatever trap he's built and disappear. This only works if I walk in exactly as vulnerable as he demands. Then you're going to die. Probably. But make sure he dies, Messier. And make sure Alara and Isla stay disappeared until every connection to Adrian is severed. That's not a request. That's my last order as your boss. He nodded once, throat working with emotion he wouldn't voice. It's been an honor, boss. The honor was mine. I walked out of my estate for the last time, climbed into a car I'd probably never drive again, and headed toward the foundry where my past had finally caught up with my present. The sun was setting as I arrived, painting everything in shades of blood and gold. Poetic, really. The universe had a dark sense of humor about these things. Adrian was waiting inside, surrounded by enough armed men to start a small war. He looked exactly like I remembered. Sharp suit. Cold eyes. Smile that never reached past his teeth. Vincenzo, he said warmly, like we were old friends meeting for drinks. You came. You threatened a child. Of course I came. Ah yes. The little girl. Slaw, right? Cute kid. Shame she has to grow up fatherless. But then again, she already was growing up fatherless, wasn't she? You'd abandoned them long before I showed up. This is between us, I said evenly. Leave them out of whatever revenge fantasy you've constructed. But they're the best part. Adrian spread his arms wide. 7 years, Vincenzo. 7 years I've spent building toward this moment. Do you know what it's like to claw your way back from death? To watch the man who tried to kill you become a legend while you're stuck in the shadows rebuilding from nothing. You betrayed the organization. You got what you deserved. I got what you decided I deserved. Big difference. He began circling me slowly, predator evaluating prey. But I'm not interested in rehashing old grievances. I'm interested in the future. Specifically, a future where I take everything you've built and you watch from whatever hell you end up in. Then shoot me and be done with it. This monologuing is tiresome. Oh, I'm not going to shoot you. That would be too quick. Too merciful. Adrian's smile widened. No, I'm going to do something much worse. I'm going to let you live. But first you're going to watch everything you love burn. He snapped his fingers. One of his men approached with a tablet, turned it toward me. The screen showed live footage of Alara's apartment building. My blood turned to ice. Surprise. Adrian said cheerfully. Did you really think I'd wait for you to move them? I've had people watching that building since yesterday. And in about 3 minutes, a very unfortunate gas leak is going to cause an explosion that will level the entire structure. Tragic accident. You'll read about it in tomorrow's papers. I lunged for him. Made it 2 steps before his men grabbed me, holding me in place while I watched the screen. Watched the building where Isla slept and Alara lived, and my entire reason for being better than I was existed. Let them go, I snarled. Take me. Kill me however you want. But let them go. Why would I do that? This is so much better. You get to live with the knowledge that you couldn't save them. That all your power, all your ruthlessness, all your legendary reputation meant nothing when it actually mattered. The countdown on the tablet read 90 seconds. And that's when I did something I'd never done in 20 years of running a criminal empire. I begged. Please. Dream, please. She's 7 years old. She has nothing to do with this. Whatever revenge you want, take it from me. Not from an innocent child. Oh, Vincenzo. There are no innocent children. Just future criminals who haven't learned the family business yet. 60 seconds. I stopped fighting against the men holding me. Stopped struggling. Just stared at the screen where a building full of sleeping people was about to become a memorial. And then something impossible happened. The feed cut to black. Adrian frowned. What? His phone rang. He answered it, face going from confused to pale to absolutely furious in the span of seconds. What do you mean they're not there? He screamed into the phone. I had eyes on that building all day. How? He looked at me. Really looked at me. and saw the faintest hint of a smile pulling at my lips. You moved them, he whispered. Before you came here. You moved them. 3 days ago, I confirmed. The second you made your first threat. I had my best people relocate them to a safe house so buried even I don't know where it is. Everything you've been watching for the last 72 hours has been theater. Empty apartment. Fake surveillance. A setup designed to make you think you had leverage when you had nothing. His face twisted with rage. Then I'll find them. I'll tear this city apart until... You won't find them, I interrupted. Because while you've been busy watching an empty apartment and planning your dramatic revelation, I've been dismantling your entire organization. Every safe house. Every account. Every connection you've built in 7 years. By morning, you'll have nothing left except the knowledge that you played your best hand and still lost. Adrian's gun appeared faster than I expected. Pressed against my forehead before his men could stop him. Then I'll settle for killing you. Go ahead, I said calmly. Pull the trigger. Become a murderer without leverage. Let my organization descend on yours with nothing held back and no reason for restraint. See how long you survive when Vincenzo Moretti becomes a martyr instead of a target. His hand shook. Finger tightened on the trigger. For a moment I thought he'd actually do it. Then his phone rang again. He answered it, still holding the gun to my head, listened for 5 seconds and went absolutely white. What? He breathed. I didn't need to hear the other end of the conversation to know what they were telling him. My people had just hit his headquarters. His money. His weapons. His leverage. Everything he'd built in 7 years, gone in the time it took for him to monologue about revenge. That's impossible, he whispered. Nobody knew where. I knew, I said quietly. I've known for 3 weeks. You think you spent 7 years preparing for this? I spent 3 weeks preparing for you. And the difference between us is I understand something you never learned. What's that? Revenge is expensive. But protection is priceless. I looked directly at him, no fear, no hesitation. You wanted to hurt me through people I love. Instead, you gave me a reason to become something worse than I've ever been. Congratulations. You've created the monster you always claimed I was. The gun lowered. Not from mercy. From the sudden realization that he'd lost before the game even started. So what now? Adrian asked bitterly. You kill me like you failed to do 7 years ago? No, I said. I let you live. Let you rebuild from nothing, knowing that if you ever come near my family again, there won't be a hole deep enough to hide in. I leaned closer. And just so we're clear, Isla is my daughter. Alara is the mother of my child. They're protected by every connection, every favor, and every ounce of violence I've ever accumulated. Touch them and I'll make the execution you witnessed 7 years ago look like mercy. I walked out of that foundry alive. Adrian's men didn't stop me. They were too busy calculating whether their loyalty was worth dying for a boss who just lost everything. By morning, news broke that Adrian Rosa's organization had imploded overnight. Arrests, seizures, and convenient accidents that removed every major player from the board. He survived, but only as a cautionary tale about coming at kings without perfect aim. And I drove to a location only 3 people in the world knew, punched in security codes that changed daily, and walked into a safe house where Alara and Isla were eating breakfast like the world outside wasn't burning. Isla looked up from her cereal, face lighting up with a smile that healed every wound I'd ever received. You came back, she said. I promised, I replied. Alara didn't say anything. Just looked at me with an expression caught between relief and exhaustion and something that might have been gratitude. It's over, I told her quietly. Adrian's finished. You're safe. Both of you. And now what? She asked. Now, I said, kneeling down so I was eye level with Isla. I keep every promise I made. Starting with dinner and dragon books and being the father you deserve instead of the monster I was. Isla threw her arms around my neck without hesitation. 7 years old and already more trusting than I'd ever been. I knew you'd come back, she whispered against my shoulder. The dragon always protects the people it loves. That's what heroes do. And surrounded by the two people who'd turned me from myth into man, I finally understood what my mother had tried to teach me all those years ago. Legacy isn't what you build. It's who you protect while building it. 3 months passed in careful reconstruction. I moved Alara and Isla into a house in the suburbs with security systems that looked like normal fixtures and guards who pretended to be neighbors. I showed up for dinner every Tuesday and Thursday, brought books Isla requested, learned to make breakfast without burning eggs, and slowly rebuilt trust I'd demolished with necessary lies. It was the closest thing to normal I'd ever experienced. But normal is fragile in the underworld. And secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. The truth came out on a Tuesday. Isla had finished her homework early and was exploring the study while I helped Alara wash dishes. She found a box I'd stupidly left unsealed, one containing documents from 7 years ago. Medical records, police reports, photographs from the warehouse night that had started everything. Mom. Isla's voice drifted from the other room, curious and confused. Why is there a picture of you at a crime scene? The dish Alara was holding slipped from her hands, shattering against the sink. We both rushed to the study where Isla stood holding a photograph that showed Alara backing away from younger me, horror written across her face, gun still in my hand. What is this? Isla asked, looking between us with those two knowing eyes. Why do you look so scared of him? Alara opened her mouth but no sound came out. Years of careful fiction crumbling in the face of photographic evidence. It's complicated, I said, kneeling down. That picture is from a long time ago before you were born. Your mother saw something that scared her and she ran away to protect you. Protect me from what? From me. Isla studied the photograph again, then looked up at me with an expression far too serious for 7 years old. Are you a bad guy? The question hung in the air like smoke. Alara watched me with barely concealed panic, clearly torn between protecting her daughter's innocence and acknowledging the truth that was literally in Isla's hands. Do you believe people can change completely, or are we always defined by our worst moments? Drop a comment because this conversation would determine everything that came after. I've done bad things, I said carefully. Things I'm not proud of. Things that hurt people. Your mother saw the worst version of me and decided she didn't want that anywhere near you. And she was right to run. But you're here now, Isla pointed out. So either you're not bad anymore or Mom thinks you're worth the risk. Which is it? How do you explain moral complexity to a child who still believes in clear heroes and villains? Alara sat down beside Isla, exhausted from the weight of maintaining fiction. People aren't just good or bad, she said quietly. They're complicated. They make choices that hurt others while trying to protect themselves. They build walls out of violence because they don't know how to build bridges out of trust. She looked at me with eyes that held 7 years of pain and 3 months of tentative healing. Your father hurt people. He still probably hurts people in ways we don't talk about. But he's also trying to be better. For you. For us. So he's like the dragon in the story, Isla said thoughtfully. The one everyone thought was a monster, but really she was just protecting her family the only way she knew how. Out of the mouths of children comes wisdom adults spend lifetimes trying to articulate. Yeah, I said, throat tight with emotion I rarely let surface. Exactly like that. Isla seemed satisfied with this explanation. She set down the photograph and grabbed my hand with her small one. Hey, but you have to promise not to be scary bad around me. Only regular bad. Like forgetting to put your dishes in the sink or staying up too late. I can do that. She ran off to finish her homework, crisis apparently resolved in her mind. But Alara stayed frozen in place, staring at the scattered documents with an expression I couldn't read. She shouldn't have seen those, I said. I'm sorry. I thought I'd locked everything away. No, Alara replied slowly. Maybe it's better this way. Maybe secrets do more damage than truth. She picked up the photograph, studied it like she was seeing it for the first time. I've spent 7 years trying to rewrite this moment in my memory. Make it less traumatic. Less defining. But looking at it now, I realize something. What? I was never going to run away from you. I was running away from who I might become if I stayed. Because standing in that warehouse, watching you pull that trigger without hesitation, I felt something besides horror. What did you feel? Understanding. The admission came out barely above a whisper. For just a second before the fear kicked in, I understood why you did it. I saw the logic. The necessity. The brutal mathematics of survival in a world I'd never been part of. And that terrified me more than the violence itself. She was giving me a gift, I realized. The truth beneath the truth. An explanation that rewrote our entire history. You weren't running from the monster, I said slowly. You were running from the part of yourself that could accept the monster. Yes. Tears were streaming down her face now. I was pregnant and scared and suddenly aware that I could justify anything if it meant protecting what mattered. And I didn't want to become someone who measured love in bodies and calculated loyalty in bloodshed. I pulled her into my arms. This woman who'd saved my life and feared my soul and somehow found a way to trust me again despite every reason not to. You're nothing like me, I whispered against her hair. You're better. You always have been. I don't know if that's true anymore, she said into my shoulder. These last 3 months, knowing what you did to Adrian's organization, knowing people died because of decisions you made to protect us, and feeling relieved instead of horrified. Grateful instead of guilty. What does that make me? Human. It makes you human. We stayed like that for a long time, 2 broken people holding each other together, until Isla called from the kitchen that she was hungry and could we please stop being dramatic and make dinner. Normal life. Or something close to it. That night, after Isla went to bed, Alara and I sat on the porch with wine neither of us was really drinking. The kind of quiet conversation that happens when all pretenses are gone and truth is the only language left. I need to ask you something, she said. And I need complete honesty even if the answer destroys what we're building. Okay. The man you killed in that warehouse 7 years ago. Adrian Rosa. You said you thought he was dead but he survived. Was he the only one you tried to kill that night? The question hit like a bullet I should have seen coming. What are you really asking, Alara? I'm asking if there were others. If Adrian was one name on a list of people you executed. If the violence I witnessed was an isolated incident or a pattern I've been deliberately ignoring. She deserved the truth. All of it. Not the sanitized version designed to let her sleep at night. Adrian betrayed our organization. Sold information to rival families that got 3 of my men killed. When I found out, I gathered everyone involved in the betrayal. 5 people total. Adrian was the last one questioned. I set down my wine, needed clear hands for this confession. The first 4 I shot without hesitation. Quick, clean. Necessary casualties in a war they'd helped start. Adrian was different because he'd been my friend. My second in command. Someone I'd trusted like a brother. And you hesitated, Alara said. For about 10 seconds. Then I pulled the trigger just like I'd done with the others. Or thought I did. Turns out he'd set up a decoy, staged his own death, and disappeared while we were distracted with cleanup. So that night I watched you murder 4 people and attempt a 5th. Yes. The word hung between us like a guillotine. And since then, she asked. How many others? Do you really want that number? Because once I say it, you can't unknow it. You can't pretend the man sitting next to you hasn't orchestrated deaths for 2 decades. You can't separate Father Vincenzo from Crime Lord Vincenzo anymore. I think I stopped being able to separate them the moment Isla asked if you were bad, Alara said. So yes, I want the number. All of it. I told her. Everything. The executions I'd ordered, the territories I'd taken, the bodies I'd stepped over to build an empire. The number was higher than she'd probably imagined. Lower than it could have been. somewhere in between monster and man. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long time. I waited for her to tell me to leave, to take my blood-soaked history and never come back, to choose the safety of ignorance over the danger of full knowledge. Instead, she asked, "Since you've been in our lives, since you've been Isla's father, have you killed anyone?" "Yes." "How many?" 12. All connected to Adrian's organization. All threats that could have traced back to you and Isla if left alive. "And if you had to make those choices again?" "I'd make them faster." She nodded slowly, processing information most people never have to grapple with. I should be horrified. I should be running like I did 7 years ago. But instead I'm sitting here thinking about how Isla sleeps peacefully because 12 threats don't exist anymore. How I can go to work without looking over my shoulder because you eliminated the danger before it arrived. How we're building something normal on a foundation of violence, and I'm too grateful to be properly disturbed. That doesn't make you a bad person, Alara. Doesn't it? What kind of mother accepts that her daughter's safety costs other people's lives? The kind who's been backed into a corner by circumstances beyond her control. The kind who's trying to navigate an impossible situation with grace and sanity. The kind who deserves to stop punishing herself for being human. She leaned against me then, exhausted from carrying the weight of truth. "I don't know how to do this, Vincenzo. I don't know how to be with you and maintain any sense of moral integrity." "You don't have to be with me," I said, even though the words hurt. "I'll keep protecting you and Isla regardless. You don't owe me anything." "That's not what I'm saying." She pulled back to look at me directly. "I'm saying I don't know how to reconcile loving someone whose hands are covered in blood. I don't know how to let Isla grow up admiring a father who solves problems with violence. I don't know how to build the life I want for her on a foundation I fundamentally oppose." "Then tell me what you need," I said. "Tell me what would make this possible. And if it's within my power, I'll do it. Get out." The words were quiet but firm. "Final. Out of the business?" I asked, needing clarification even though my heart was already sinking. "Out of the life. The empire. The violence. All of it. Build something legitimate. Become someone Isla can admire without cognitive dissonance. Give us a future that doesn't involve armed guards pretending to be neighbors and wondering which enemy will try to hurt us next. Alara, I know it's not fair to ask you to give up everything you've built. I know it might be impossible. But I can't raise a daughter in the shadow of your world and pretend it's not slowly destroying the values I'm trying to teach her. So either you find a way out or we find a way to live separately while co-parenting. Those are the only 2 options I can live with." The ultimatum hung in the night air like smoke. And for the first time in my life I had to choose between power and love. Between the empire I'd built and the family I'd discovered. It should have been an easy choice. It wasn't. Because walking away from my organization meant leaving a power vacuum that would trigger war. Meant abandoning people who'd bled for me. Meant dismantling 2 decades of careful construction and hoping the collapse didn't bury innocent people in the rubble. But staying in meant losing Alara and Isla. Meant watching from a distance as they built a life that excluded me. Meant being the monster in Isla's story instead of the father. "Give me 6 months, I said finally. 6 months to transition power, legitimize assets, and extract myself from operations without triggering civil war. 6 months to become someone who can walk away without leaving chaos in his wake. And then I'm yours. Completely. No empire. No violence. Just a man trying to be a father and partner without the weight of criminal legacy pulling him back into darkness." Alara searched my face for lies or hesitation. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she kissed me for the first time in 7 years. Soft and tentative and filled with hope I didn't deserve but would fight like hell to earn. 6 months, she agreed. "But Vincenzo, if you can't actually do this, if you realize you're more addicted to power than committed to us, tell me before the deadline. Don't string us along with false promises." "I won't," I said. and I meant it. But neither of us knew then that in 72 hours, someone would try to kill Isla. And my carefully planned extraction would become an emergency evacuation covered in blood and broken promises. Because the past never really dies. It just waits for the perfect moment to collect its debt. Day 72 of my 6-month extraction plan. Everything went to hell during Isla's school pickup. Elara called me from a number I didn't recognize, voice trembling with controlled panic. The kind of calm that comes from forcing yourself not to scream while your world collapses. Someone tried to take her. 4 words. My entire universe tilting on its axis. Where are you? I was already moving, grabbing keys, signaling my security team. Police station. They got the men who tried to grab her. 2 of them. But Vincenzo, they had your family crest tattooed on their wrist. They were yours. My blood went cold. Not Adrian's men. Someone inside my organization had turned. I'm 10 minutes away. Don't talk to anyone until I get there. I made it in 7, breaking every traffic law between my office and the precinct. Elara sat in a conference room with Isla pressed against her side, both of them wrapped in shock blankets like victims. Which they were. Victims of my world bleeding into theirs despite every precaution. Isla's face was tear-streaked, but she wasn't crying anymore. Just staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much too fast. 7 years old and already learning that monsters wear familiar faces. Hey, I said softly, kneeling in front of her. You okay? She looked at me with an expression that broke something in my chest. You said you'd keep us safe. I know. I'm sorry. They said you sent them. They said you wanted to move me somewhere safer. But Mom taught me the code word and they didn't know it, so I screamed. Her voice was steady. Too steady. The kind of calm that comes from shock. Why did they have your marks on their arms if you didn't send them? Have you ever had to explain betrayal to a child who still believes in absolute loyalty? Drop a comment because this moment haunted me for years afterward. Because someone in my organization decided to hurt me by taking you. They pretended to be my men, used my symbols, and hoped you'd trust them enough to go quietly. But I didn't. A hint of pride crept into her voice. I remembered what Mom said about strangers and code words. I was brave like the dragons. You were braver than any dragon I've ever heard of, I said, pulling her into a hug she desperately needed. Over her head, I met Elara's eyes and saw everything she wasn't saying out loud. This is your world touching her. This is what I was afraid of. This is why I asked you to leave. The detective handling the case entered with a folder thick with preliminary findings. Mr. Moretti. We need to talk. Not in front of my daughter, I said firmly. Actually, she gave us most of the information we have. Smart kid. Notice details that'll help us build a case. He flipped open the folder showing photographs of the 2 men currently sitting in holding cells. You know them. I studied the faces. Low-level enforcers. Muscle without ambition. The kind of men who took orders without asking questions. They work in my shipping division. Not high enough in the organization to plan something like this independently. That's what we thought. So who's giving them orders? That was the question, wasn't it? I'd spent 2 months carefully transitioning power, moving my most trusted people into leadership positions, phasing out anyone with connections to Adrian's old network. But clearly I'd missed someone. Someone patient enough to wait until I was vulnerable before making their move. I'll find out, I said. Mr. Moretti, this is an active police investigation. You can't, detective. I cut him off with a look that reminded him exactly who he was talking to. Those men tried to kidnap my daughter. Your investigation will take months. Trials. Appeals. Legal delays. I'll have answers by morning. And I'll deliver them in whatever format you prefer. The detective hesitated, caught between duty and pragmatism. Finally he closed the folder. 24 hours. Then I'm coming after you for obstruction if you withhold information. Fair enough. I took Elara and Isla home, though neither seemed to know where home was anymore. The suburban house with its false sense of security felt violated now, contaminated by the knowledge that danger had come within yards of Isla. "Pack bags," I told Alara quietly while Isla was in the bathroom. "Essentials only. We're moving you tonight." "Where?" "Somewhere even I won't know the location. My security chief will handle the transfer. You'll have new identities, new lives, complete separation from anything connected to me. You're sending us away." "Not a question. An accusation. I'm keeping you alive. Someone inside my organization wants to hurt me through Isla. And they won't stop until either they're dead or she's beyond my reach. So I'm putting her beyond my reach." "For how long?" "Until I've cleaned out every traitor, secured every loose end, and rebuilt my organization from the ground up with people I can actually trust. However long that takes." Alara's face crumpled. Not from fear. From exhaustion. From the weight of running and hiding and rebuilding only to run again. "I'm so tired, Vincenzo. I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of teaching my daughter code words and escape routes like it's normal childhood education." "I know. And I'm sorry. But right now tired doesn't matter. Safe matters. Alive matters. Everything else is negotiable. What about your 6-month plan? What about extracting yourself from the life?" "The plan just accelerated. I'll burn the entire organization to ash if that's what it takes to eliminate the threat. But I need you away from the fire." She was quiet for a long moment, processing. "Then, if we do this, if we disappear completely, how will we know when it's safe to come back?" "You'll read about it in the news. Mass arrests. Organizational collapse. The end of Vincenzo Moretti's empire. And when the smoke clears, I'll find you. Not as a crime lord. Just as a man who kept his promise to walk away. And if you don't survive the cleanup, then my estate transfers to Isla. Every legitimate asset, every secured account, everything I've built that isn't tied to criminal enterprise. She'll be provided for. Educated. Protected by lawyers instead of guns. You'll both be free of this world completely." Isla emerged from the bathroom, face washed, wearing the brave mask children put on when they're trying to be strong for their parents. "Are we leaving again?" "Yes," Alara said gently. "One more time. But this time will be different." "Because this time it's forever?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Alara looked to me for an answer I didn't have. "Because this time you won't have to be afraid," I said instead. "You can just be a kid who likes dragons and hates wearing dresses. No code words. No looking over your shoulder. Just normal." "Will you visit?" Isla asked, and the hope in her voice destroyed me. "When it's safe. When I've made sure no one will ever try to hurt you again because of me." "That's what you said last time. Before the men came." She wasn't wrong. I'd promised safety and delivered danger. Promised protection and provided trauma. Promised a father and given her a reason to need witness protection. "You're right," I admitted, sitting down so we were eye level. "I promised I'd keep you safe and I failed. Those men got close enough to scare you and that's unacceptable. So now I'm making a different promise. I'm going to remove myself from your life until I can guarantee that being my daughter doesn't make you a target. And I know that sounds like abandonment. I know it feels like I'm running away. But I'm not running from you. I'm running toward the people who tried to hurt you and I won't stop until they're gone." "And then you'll come back?" Her voice was so small. So fragile. "And then I'll come back." She studied my face with those serious eyes, looking for lies or false promises. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded once. "Hey. But you have to finish the Dragon series. All 12 books. So when you come back we can talk about them." "It's a deal." We left that night under cover of darkness. 3 cars. Separate routes. My security chief drove Alara and Isla to a location he wouldn't share even under torture. I trusted him with their lives because he'd proven himself over 15 years of loyal service. But I'd thought the same thing about the men who'd tried to kidnap Isla. Trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. The next 72 hours were brutal. I pulled every member of my organization in for individual questioning. Not police-style interrogation. The kind where fear is the only language spoken and truth is the only acceptable answer. By hour 48 I'd identified the traitor. Marco Vitelli. My logistics coordinator. A man who'd been with me for 8 years, who'd never shown a hint of disloyalty, who'd apparently been recruited by Adrian's surviving network 6 months ago. They'd promised him a territory of his own if he could deliver leverage against me. And he'd decided a 7-year-old child was acceptable collateral. I didn't kill Marco quickly. I needed him to give up every name, every connection, every person who'd helped plan or execute the kidnapping attempt. He held out for about 20 minutes before pain became more persuasive than loyalty. By the time I was finished, I had a list of 12 people inside my organization who'd been compromised. 12 traitors who'd looked me in the eye and smiled while planning to hurt my daughter. None of them survived the week. I'm not proud of what I did in those 7 days. The violence, the ruthlessness, the complete absence of mercy that defined every decision. But I'd promised Isla I'd eliminate the threat, and that's exactly what I did. The media called it a gang war. Police called it organizational house cleaning. People who knew better called it what it was: a father removing obstacles between himself and his child's safety. On day 8 I started dismantling my empire systematically. Selling legitimate businesses to vetted buyers. Transferring criminal operations to rivals who'd signed agreements to stay away from my family. Burning bridges I'd spent 2 decades building. Some people thought I was crazy. Walking away from billions in assets and unchallenged power because of one kidnapping attempt. They didn't understand that power without the people you love is just an expensive prison. 3 months into the dismantling process, I received a text from an unknown number. Just a photograph. It showed Isla smiling at a beach, building sandcastles, looking happy and safe and blissfully unaware of everything I'd destroyed to give her that moment. No message. No caption. Just proof that my security chief had kept his word. I saved that photo. Looked at it every night when the weight of walking away felt too heavy to carry. When associates asked why I was throwing away everything we'd built. When the power I'd wielded for so long whispered that I was making a mistake. That photo reminded me what mattered. 6 months after Isla's attempted kidnapping, I signed the final papers dissolving my organization. Watched 20 years of empire collapse into legal businesses and severed connections. Became nobody. Just a man with too much money and a past he couldn't advertise on job applications. I kept 2 things from my old life. Enough security to stay alive and a phone that could receive messages from one number only. 2 weeks later that phone rang. "It's done," my former security chief said. "Clean extraction. No trails. They're ready to come home if home is still safe." "It is," I confirmed. "Give me the address." He rattled off a location 3 states away. A small town nobody had heard of. The kind of place where criminal empires felt like urban legends and mafia bosses were just stories told in movies. I drove for 18 hours straight, stopping only for gas and coffee. Rehearsing what I'd say. How I'd explain that I'd kept my promise. That Vincenzo Moretti, the crime lord, was dead, replaced by Vincenzo Moretti, the unemployed former businessman with questionable history. The house was modest. Nothing like the suburban palace I'd moved them into before. But it had a garden Isla had clearly helped plant and wind chimes Alara had chosen, and evidence of a life built without fear. I knocked on the door at sunset, heart pounding harder than it had during any criminal confrontation. Alara answered. Her face cycled through shock, relief, and something that might have been joy before settling on cautious hope. "You're alive," she said. "I'm free," I replied. "The organization is gone. The threats are eliminated. I'm nobody now. Just a man keeping a promise." Prove it. I pulled out documentation. Business sale receipts. Account transfers. Legal documents showing complete severance from every criminal enterprise. A new identity that held no connection to my past. She studied the papers with an accountant's eye, looking for loopholes or lies. Finally, she stepped aside. Isla's in the backyard. She's been asking about you every day for 6 months. Don't make me regret letting you see her. I walked through the house, noting the differences. Photos on walls that had been bare before. Books I'd never seen. Evidence of healing I hadn't been present for. Isla was exactly where Alara said she'd be, lying in the grass reading a book about dragons. She'd grown in 6 months. Looked older. Less like the terrified child I'd sent away and more like someone learning to be brave again. "Hey," I said quietly. She looked up, and for a moment I saw calculation in her expression. Testing whether this was real or another abandonment disguised as protection. Then she set down her book and ran. Full speed. Arms wide. Crashing into me with the force of 6 months' worth of missed hugs and stored-up trust. "You came back," she said against my chest. "You actually came back. I promised. Did you finish the dragon books?" "All 12. Twice." She pulled back to look at my face, checking for lies. "What was your favorite part?" "The ending of book 9. When the dragon realizes that protecting people doesn't mean fighting their battles for them. It means teaching them to fight for themselves so they don't need protection anymore." Isla smiled, satisfied that I'd actually read them. "That's my favorite part too. Because the dragon gets to stop being scary and just be a regular dragon who helps instead of fights." "Exactly." We spent the evening on their back porch, Isla nestled between Alara and me, talking about dragons and beach trips and the new school she'd started. Normal conversation. The kind families have when violence isn't the subtext underneath every sentence. After Isla went to bed, Alara and I sat in the quiet with wine and unspoken questions. "What now?" she finally asked. "Now I figure out who Vincenzo is when he's not running an empire. I get a normal job doing normal things. I show up for dinner and homework help and parent-teacher conferences. I become the father Isla deserves and the partner you asked for. Can you really do that? Can you really be normal after 20 years of absolute power?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm going to try. Because the alternative is losing you both, and I've already done that once. I won't survive it again." She leaned against me, exhausted from 6 months of single parenting and constant fear. "I'm still angry at you. For bringing danger into our lives. For making us run. For all of it. I know. But I'm also grateful. For the lengths you went to protect us. For actually keeping your promise when you could have just sent money and called it fatherhood. For choosing us over everything you'd built." "It wasn't a choice," I said quietly. "The moment I met Isla, everything else became expendable. I just needed time to catch up to that realization." We sat there until the stars came out, 2 people who'd survived impossible circumstances and somehow found their way back to each other. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Too much trauma. Too many scars. Too much history written in blood and fear. But it was real. And messy. And more than I'd ever hoped to have. 3 years later, I stood in the audience at Isla's school play. She was dressed as a dragon, fierce and protective, guarding her village from imaginary threats. Her voice rang out clear and confident as she delivered her final line. "Real strength isn't about defeating enemies. It's about protecting the people you love without becoming a monster in the process." The irony wasn't lost on me. After the show, she ran to us in her dragon costume, face flushed with excitement. Did you see me be brave? You were incredible," Alara said, hugging her tight. "Best dragon I've ever seen," I agreed. Isla beamed. Then more quietly, "Mom said you used to be scary. Before I was born. Is that true?" I glanced at Alara, who nodded slightly. Permission to be honest. Yes. I was very scary. I hurt people and made decisions I'm not proud of. But you're not scary anymore? I'm trying not to be. Every day I try to be a little less like the monster I was and a little more like the father you deserve. She considered this seriously. That's good. Because monsters don't get to come to school plays. Only regular dads get to do that. Then I'm very glad to be a regular dad. She hugged me tight, costume wings crinkling against my jacket. Me too. As we walked to the car, Isla between us holding both our hands, I caught Alara's eye over her head. The look we shared held years of pain and healing. Of running and returning. Of promises broken and kept. She smiled. Small. Tentative. But real. And in that moment, I understood something my mother had tried to teach me decades ago. Legacy isn't measured in territory controlled or enemies defeated. It's measured in the people who hold your hand without fear. In the children who believe you're more than your worst moments. In the second chances you didn't earn but were given anyway. That night, tucking Isla into bed, she asked one final question. Dad, do you think people can really change? Like completely? I think people can become better versions of themselves if they want it badly enough. Why? Because in my dragon book, everyone says dragons can't change their nature. They're either good or bad forever. But I don't think that's true. What do you think? I think everyone has a choice. Every single day they choose what kind of dragon to be. And some days they might choose wrong, but as long as they keep choosing to be better, that's what matters. From the mouths of 10-year-olds comes wisdom that took me 40 years to understand. You're absolutely right, I said, kissing her forehead. Every day is a choice. I left her room and found Alara standing in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. She's so wise, Alara whispered. How did we get so lucky? We didn't get lucky. We survived long enough to deserve her. That night, lying in bed beside the woman who'd saved my life twice, once with stitches and once with boundaries, I finally felt something I'd never experienced in 20 years of ruling the underworld. Peace. Not the temporary absence of conflict. Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing you've fought your last war and chosen your final allegiance. I'd been Vincenzo Moretti, the myth, the monster, the untouchable crime lord. Now I was just Vincenzo. Father. Partner. Former villain learning to be a regular dad. And somehow that was enough. The past never truly dies. It lives in the scars we carry and the stories we tell ourselves about who we were. But it doesn't have to define who we become. 7 years ago, a woman ran from me after watching me execute a traitor. 3 years ago I walked away from an empire to protect a daughter I barely knew. Today I attended a school play and held hands with my family without wondering which enemy was watching. That's not redemption. Redemption is too clean a word for the messy reality of change. But it's something close. And for a man who spent most of his life surrounded by violence, something close to redemption feels like winning. Tell me in the comments. Do you believe people can truly change, or are we all just playing roles until our nature catches up? Because I used to think I knew the answer. Now I'm living proof that sometimes the question itself is more important than the certainty. Subscribe before the next story finds you. Because every ending is just another beginning waiting to be written. And some beginnings are worth fighting for.